Chosen. 1. It's time to stop ignoring God, listen or regret. Before we go any further, understand this. You did not find this message by accident. Something higher than algorithms, higher than timing, and higher than coincidence aligned this exact moment for you. There has been a quiet tug on your spirit lately, hasn't there? A feeling you can't fully explain. A sense that life looks normal on the outside, yet inside everything feels unfamiliar. You've been in rooms full of people and still felt alone. You've spoken and felt unheard. You've smiled while carrying a weight in your chest that no one else can see. That is not random emotion. That is spiritual transition. That is what happens when God begins pulling a chosen one out of the crowd and into divine alignment. The loneliness you feel is not rejection, it is redirection. It is not abandonment, it is divine protection. God is not removing you from life. He is removing distractions from around you so you can finally hear Him clearly. The noise had to fade, the attachments had to loosen, the comfort had to shake. Because clarity only comes when the soul is quiet enough to listen. Before we go deeper, type "I am chosen" in the comments, because this message is for those who feel that shift happening deep inside. Like this video and subscribe so you stay connected to messages that confirm what God is doing in your life. Now take a slow breath, release the noise in your mind, and allow your spirit to listen. This is not hype. This is not entertainment. This is confirmation. You've been sensing that certain doors are closing, certain people are drifting away, and certain desires don't excite you the way they used to. That's because your spirit is outgrowing environments your soul once tolerated. When God calls someone higher, He first makes their current level uncomfortable. You're not losing your life. You're shedding a version of yourself that can't go where you're being led. And here is the part many chosen ones misunderstand. When God starts speaking louder, life can feel quieter. Social circles shrink. Validation fades. Distractions lose their flavor. It can feel like isolation, but it's actually an invitation. An invitation to depend on God's voice more than people's opinions. An invitation to build spiritual strength instead of social approval. An invitation to discover who you are without the noise of who you were expected to be. The urgency you feel right now is not pressure from the world. It's a pull from heaven. God has been whispering, but whispers turn into silence when ignored, and silence turns into distance. This is the moment to respond, not with fear, but with surrender, not with excuses, but with obedience. Because when a chosen one keeps ignoring the call, life becomes heavier, not lighter. But when you finally say yes, peace begins to replace pressure, clarity replaces confusion, and purpose replaces wandering. So don't brush this off. Don't scroll past the feeling. This is your confirmation. God is calling, and your next level begins the moment you stop ignoring His voice. Point 1. God removed you before they could break you. There were environments you begged to stay in that God quietly pulled you out of. And at the time, it felt like something precious had been taken from you, like a door slammed shut just when you were ready to walk through it. You mourned what you thought was a loss, but in reality, you were being rescued from something your eyes could not yet see. You saw smiles, opportunities, and promises, but God saw the spiritual undercurrents beneath the surface. He saw jealousy forming behind compliments, subtle competition masked as support, and manipulation hiding behind carefully chosen words of kindness. He saw the emotional and spiritual traps you were slowly being led toward, the kind that drain your confidence, distort your identity, and delay your purpose. So he intervened without giving you an explanation, and that is what hurt the most. Protection rarely feels like protection in the beginning. It feels like loss, like confusion, like being unwanted or left behind. It feels like you were not chosen, when in truth you were being set apart. If God had allowed you to remain, the damage would have gone deeper than your temporary disappointment. Some relationships were assignments, not alignments, sent to teach you discernment, not to travel with you into destiny. Some opportunities were distractions disguised as blessings, shiny on the outside but empty at the core. Some doors looked wide open but led into spiritual cages where your growth would have been restricted and your voice slowly silenced. God loves you too much to let you be celebrated in rooms where your destiny would be suffocated. So he allowed the disconnection, the drifting apart, the unanswered messages, and the unexpected endings. Not because you failed, but because you are called, and the higher the calling, the tighter the protection around your life. What feels like rejection is often divine interception, a loving redirection away from what would have broken you. God will let you cry over a closed door if it prevents you from walking straight into a trap. And one day you will look back with clarity and gratitude, thanking him even for the prayers he chose not to answer. Point 2. Isolation is where God gets your full attention. When your life is loud, God speaks softly, but when he needs your focus, he allows stillness. Notice how the distractions have decreased. Fewer people calling, fewer plans unfolding, more quiet evenings and more time alone with your thoughts. You thought something was wrong with your life's rhythm, but what if this is heaven adjusting your pace? What if the slowing down is not a delay but a divine recalibration? God is reducing the noise so you can hear the whisper, because destiny is not downloaded in crowded spaces. It is revealed in quiet ones. This is the season where external validation loses its volume so internal revelation can rise. Applause fades, opinions grow distant, and the need to be seen is gently replaced by the need to understand. God is teaching you to know who you are without applause, to trust his voice without confirmation from others, and to move by faith without emotional hype or public recognition. You are learning to sit with yourself, and that is uncomfortable because most people spend their whole lives avoiding that place. Silence feels heavy when you're not used to meeting your own soul there. But the chosen cannot avoid it. You are being trained to find peace in God's presence instead of comfort in people's company, to draw strength from stillness instead of stimulation. This is where identity becomes anchored, not in roles, titles, or relationships, but in divine truth. This is where purpose becomes clear, not through pressure, but through presence. This is where strength is built in silence before it is revealed in public, where roots grow deep before branches reach wide. God isolates to insulate. He pulls you away to protect the transformation happening within you. What feels like separation is actually spiritual shielding. What feels like loneliness is actually sacred focus. He is removing interference so your spirit can recalibrate, so your discernment can sharpen, and so your dependence shifts from people to him. In this stillness, he's rewriting your confidence, redefining your identity, and realigning your direction. The quiet is not empty, it is full of instruction. The pause is not punishment, it is preparation. Point 3. You were too accessible to people who didn't deserve you. Your heart has always been open, wide like a door that never learned how to close. You answered calls at midnight, spoke life into others while quietly fighting battles no one saw, and gave your strength away in pieces, believing love meant constant access. You showed up with sincerity, with loyalty, with a depth of care that many people benefit from but few truly understand. But not everyone around you was assigned to walk your entire journey. Some people were only meant to encounter an earlier chapter of you, not the person you are in the process of becoming. And when God saw that your kindness was being mistaken for availability, that your presence was being treated as convenience rather than covenant, He intervened in ways you didn't immediately recognize, because you were pouring into people who had no intention of pouring back into you. You were investing emotional wealth into temporary souls, staying loyal to connections that were only seasonal, and your energy, your compassion, your spiritual capacity, it is too valuable to be constantly drained by those who only come to receive. So, God created distance that you didn't have the heart to create yourself. He allowed misunderstandings so unhealthy attachments could loosen their grip. He allowed silence where there used to be constant communication, so emotional dependency could finally break. Not because you are difficult to love, not because you failed, not because you are meant to be alone, but because you are called to something that requires emotional clarity, spiritual strength, and inner alignment. You cannot carry everyone into your next level. Some people only fit who you were, not who you are becoming. The smaller circle you see now is not rejection. It is refinement. It is divine filtering. It is preparation. Because where God is taking you, you must be emotionally light, spiritually focused, and mentally clear. You must move without guilt, love without depletion, and serve without self-abandonment. This season of distance is not loss. It is protection. Not isolation, but redirection. Not punishment, but positioning for purpose. Point 4. God is rebuilding your identity without their opinions. For years you measured yourself through the shifting expressions of other people's faces. Praise lifted you. Criticism diminished you. Acceptance made you feel safe. Rejection made you question your worth. Your identity rose and fell like a tide controlled by voices that were never meant to define you. But now, many of those voices have grown quiet. Some relationships changed. Some connections faded. Some rooms you once occupied no longer feel accessible. And in the silence, you feel exposed, almost unsure of who you are without the constant feedback loop. That discomfort is not abandonment. It is reconstruction. God is intentionally removing the mirrors that distorted your reflection so He can rebuild your identity from heaven's perspective instead of human opinion. You are learning to see yourself through divine truth rather than social approval. This is the sacred space where false labels begin to fall away. Words like not enough, too much, behind, or unworthy lose their authority because they were never written by God in the first place. Old insecurities start loosening their grip, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because your foundation is shifting. Confidence is no longer being fed by applause, attention, or validation. It is being formed in quiet conviction. God is teaching you to stand firm in who He says you are, even when no one else recognizes it yet. Even when there is no audience, no encouragement, no visible proof. Because public affirmation without internal alignment creates fragile success that collapses under pressure. But identity formed in God's presence produces a steady, unshakable confidence that does not depend on circumstances. You are not becoming someone new. You are uncovering who you were always designed to be, beneath the expectations, the fear, and the conditioning placed on you by the world. Layers are being peeled back, masks are being removed, Performance is being replaced with authenticity. This process feels lonely because transformation is often private before it becomes visible. Roots grow underground before trees rise above the surface. God develops identity in hidden places so that when elevation comes, it is sustained by depth, not ego. What feels like isolation is actually consecration. What feels like loss is refinement. And what feels like uncertainty is the beginning of clarity grounded not in people's reactions but in divine truth. Point 5. This season feels empty because God is making room. You look around and see spaces where people used to be, opportunities that once filled your calendar, distractions that kept your mind busy from morning to night, and now there is room. Too much room. And the silence feels loud. The stillness unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, like something has gone wrong, like life has quietly taken things from you without explanation. But spiritually, this is not loss, it is preparation, because God cannot pour new blessings into a life that is still crowded with expired attachments, old roles, drained connections, outdated dreams, and noise that once felt important but was never eternal. So he gently begins to clear emotional clutter, mental noise, and spiritual distractions, not to punish you, but to increase your capacity, because what is coming requires space, focus, and spiritual strength you could not develop while everything was full. And that emptiness you feel is not absence, it is availability. You are being made available for greater responsibility, deeper purpose, and a higher calling that cannot coexist with the version of life you had before. But first, space must exist, because purpose needs room to breathe, and calling needs silence to be heard, and this in-between season, this strange stretch of life where nothing feels stable and nothing looks like progress, is where faith is tested at the deepest level, because you cannot see what God is building while He builds it. You cannot measure spiritual construction with physical evidence, yet everything is being aligned behind the scenes in ways your eyes cannot track and your mind cannot calculate. Conversations you haven't had yet, doors you haven't seen yet, strength you haven't needed yet are all being prepared in the quiet, just like roots grow in hidden places before trees rise in visible ones, pushing deeper into unseen soil, strengthening foundations long before branches ever reach sunlight. And your roots are going deeper than you realize. Your character is stabilizing, your discernment is sharpening, your dependence on God is becoming less theoretical and more lived. So when the visible growth finally appears, it will not collapse under pressure. This space is not your setback, it is your strengthening ground, not your abandonment, but your appointment, because God is not removing things to leave you empty. He is making room so you can finally carry what was always meant for you. Point 6. The enemy attacks, most when you are close to breakthrough. Have you noticed the strange resistance lately, the sudden waves of doubt, the unusual fatigue, and the old fears trying to resurface as if they never left? That is not coincidence. It is opposition reacting to your progress. Because the enemy does not fight people who are stagnant, comfortable, or asleep. He fights movement. He fights growth. And he fights purpose, awakening in real time. The closer you get to alignment, the louder distractions try to become, not because you are failing, but because you are advancing into territory that once held you back. Pressure is often proof that you are near a breakthrough, and resistance is confirmation that your steps truly matter in ways you cannot yet see. If nothing significant was ahead, there would be no reason for spiritual interference, no reason for the sudden wait, and no reason for the intensified battle around your focus and peace. So do not interpret difficulty as defeat. Interpret it as evidence that your obedience is disrupting something in the spiritual realm, shifting patterns that once operated unnoticed. God would not allow this level of resistance unless there was something deeply valuable on the other side of your perseverance, something worth protecting, something that requires your faith to be stronger than your fear. Point 7. God is training you to walk by faith, not feelings. Right now, you do not feel powerful. You do not feel certain. You do not feel chosen. And that is exactly where faith grows. Feelings fluctuate. Faith anchors. God is teaching you to move based on trust, not emotion. To obey without emotional confirmation. To continue without visible proof. Because destiny requires endurance, not excitement. This season is building spiritual muscles you will need later when responsibility increases and pressure intensifies. Faith developed in quiet seasons becomes strength in public ones. You are learning to trust God's voice over your mood, His promises over your fears, and His timing over your impatience. And when this chapter closes, you will look back and realize this lonely, confusing, stretching season was the foundation of your transformation. Chosen one, you are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are being positioned. Stay in the stillness. Stay in the process. Stay listening. Because God is not silent. He is preparing you for a level of clarity, purpose, and impact you could not carry before. If this message speaks to your spirit, type "I am chosen" in the comments, like this video, and subscribe. Your isolation is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your calling.